The White Tower, the first book in the Aldoran Chronicles by Michael Wisehart, is a feat when it comes to multi-first-person viewpoints. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Fantasy Inc. My name is Wyeth, and today we're talking about The White Tower by Michael Wisehart. This series is paired with a sister series that I've actually done a video on previously on the Rats of Aramor, where that series is a coming-of-age story about a young man named Ayrion. The White Tower basically jumps forward about 20 years. Now, Ayrion, our main character from Rats of Aramor, does make a lot of appearances in the White Tower, but he is no longer the sole protagonist. In the White Tower series, it is split between 3 different individuals. Their names are Ty, Farron, and of course, Ayrion. Now, I thought this was a very interesting route to go down, and it reminded me a lot of The Wheel of Time. Spoilers ahead. Whereas, yes, Rand is the main character, but he also is accompanied by both Matt and Perrin, who both have many arcs throughout the series, which is similar to what we have in The White Tower. Now, I'll go ahead and give a synopsis about the story as a whole, trying to steer away from the spoilers, which we'll talk about in the deep dive. Now, the Land of Aldoran is a high fantasy series filled with different kings and kingdoms. The driving force of this conflict that will arise in this series is that people who have magic are hunted down. There is a ban on magic and mages and sorcerers and magic users. So with all that said, those who have magic definitely want to keep it under wraps. Michael Wisehart does a great job of building out the lore of why this is, but we'll get into that later. Now, when it comes down to it, a lot of our main characters are magic users, and some are trying to keep it under wraps, and some have already been found out. And the White Tower is a place that you do not want to go if you have magic. You can just picture, well, they're being tortured, to be quite candid with you. Now, when it comes down to it, our protagonists all have innate abilities which are making them more powerful than the others and their counterparts. Some are further along in the knowledge they have about their own magic, whereas others are completely in the dark. And Michael Wisehart has a great way of jumping between scenes and making sure that the reader is getting a good picture of the lay of the land, if you will. Now I'll go ahead and jump over to the pro part of the video, where we'll be discussing what I really liked about it and some things that could have been done in a different way. The first pro is going to be the multi-viewpoint. Now, this is a great tool for authors to utilize when they are trying to show the overarching conflicts that are going on throughout the story. What I mean by this is we're getting to see the conflicts play out in the different social structures of the world. So one conflict is playing out with the kings themselves, and we're getting to see what's going on and the decisions being made that are allowing it to continue or fester, if you will. Whereas on the complete opposite side of that, we're getting to see basically a farm town and the situations that they're put into due to these decisions made by the higher-ups of the caste system that they're in, and they have to do their best to try and survive. Jumping over to the con, I will say the first part of the book is a little slow, and this is kind of related to the multi-viewpoints, the pro I just mentioned. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. To introduce all these characters to get multiple viewpoints of the story, you need to then introduce all of their backstories and motivations. And when you have 20 different viewpoints in the first book alone, which is what I'm pretty sure it was, you're going to be bogged down with a lot of exposition. Though, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. All these characters are laying out the world as a whole, and now throughout the series, the author, Michael Wisehart, will be able to jump to their perspectives, and ideally it will add more to the story. My final pro is the fact that we actually get the villain's perspective, which is very rarely seen. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of this, to kind of get inside the head of the antagonist and really understand their motivations of the actions that they are doing. So I thought that was a very interesting route to go down. Now for my final thoughts on the book as a whole, I did really enjoy it. I cannot wait to see where these characters take the story, specifically Ayrion, since it's a character that I got to read a lot about in Street Rats of Aramor. So I hope y'all pick this one up. It is definitely worth the read. Now we're gonna go ahead and jump over to the deep dive, talking about the spoilers. So if you haven't picked this one up already, please do, and when you read it, feel free to come back to the video. So for this specific deep dive, I'm actually going to tackle each of our main protagonists and kind of go over their own arcs. I imagine the story is going to converge all of these characters into one party, if you will, and from there they're going to then go on to fight the evil force. But to get a good understanding of their motivations, I want to tackle each of them individually. We'll go ahead and start with Ty, the chosen one that was saved in the beginning of the story by this grand wizard. It's been 16 years since that first chapter had happened, and Ty is a young man coming to grips with being a wielder where he doesn't believe any of his family are. Now, we find out later on that they actually are part of the Wielder Council, and almost all of them, other than the mother, I should say, have the ability to utilize magic. And Ty becomes wrapped up in the council once he accidentally approaches a witch that he probably wanted to steer clear of. Now, I would say that Ty is definitely going to be a pivotal character, but compared to the other two protagonists, this is, in my opinion, one of the weaker storylines. And I say that because we get such an interesting dynamic when it comes to Farron and Ayrion with the situations that they're in, whereas Ty is fairly ignorant when it comes to the world as a whole, having grown up in this small town. And by the end of book one, that specific arc definitely takes the main stage, and it definitely pays off by the end of it. That final battle, his mother dying, is definitely a Uncle Ben moment, if you know what I mean, and he will then try his best to learn how to control these powers that he has, and he has a great teacher in the wizard who has just hit the scene again. Jumping over to Farron's storyline, I thought that this was a very interesting viewpoint to have. Now, Farron is the smith who created Ayrion's black magic blades that can cut through just about anything, and he has been picked up by the White Tower for being a wielder. The White Tower doesn't want the other side to have access to his weaponry because Valtor, the Chancellor of the White Tower, is on a crusade to defeat the non-magic portions of the world. But in his eyes, it's for a greater good, and Farron, sadly, is caught up in his schemes. Now, I really did enjoy his ability to make light of a situation, a very bleak situation, if you will, while he's being tortured by Cheeks, and having gotten both Nostrils and Ray on his side to escape the White Tower was very riveting. I do think it was a very interesting tie-in to have Asriel, Farron's cellmate, be Kellen's father, aka Ty's father, and am very much looking forward to seeing how that plays out and finding out who is going to be the next person that Asriel gets put in a cell with, since his work, as Asriel sees it, is not quite yet done. He has to help out someone else who comes to the White Tower either escape or tear it down from within, so we will have to see who that is. Jumping over to Ayrion, my personal favorite character out of the bunch, it is very interesting to see the difference in his situation from Street Rats of Aramor to where he is now as the Grand Protector for the King. I will say I really did think that Dakaran and Ayrion were going to become lifelong friends and that Ayrion would then one day become Dakaran's advisor. But Michael Wisehart definitely ripped off the band-aid when we got to see Dakaran being a little pompous brat and ended up helping Valtor in overthrowing his father, the king, and therefore getting Ayrion a couple bolts in the back. One of my favorite parts was understanding Ayrion's leaving the street rats and the different tribes that he had in contact with, and we got a little taste of that with his conversations with Kira and Poe, Kira being red for the Street Rats of Aramor. It was sad to see. It's definitely a closing of a chapter, since that was such a large portion of his own life in a series that I really did enjoy. Now, I will say both are not done, and I cannot wait for the last book in the Street Rats of Aramor, as well as to keep reading this series. But I thought these characters like Red, Reeve, and Sapphire were going to be really instrumental to this series, but it appears that they very much are not the main players, which I can completely understand Mr. Wisehart doing that. He wanted to introduce a grander scope to the world as a whole, because the conflicts occurring are world conflicts, opposed to with Street Rats, it was very much what was going on in the city itself. When it comes to Ayrion, I do really hope that he is able to find Reeve and understand where Sapphire is as well. That is going to be a very good reunion in my opinion, but his storyline is definitely going to be overthrowing and or killing Dakaran. And that is a battle that I cannot wait to see. Please, in the comments, feel free to tell me what you thought of the White Tower as a whole, as well as comparing it to the Street Rats of Aramor. I would love to see y'all's comments. If you do spoil something, though, please feel free to give a heads up for those who have not read the series yet. With that, I do appreciate everyone's time. I hope everyone has an absolutely fantastic rest of your week, and be sure to keep reading.